Alright, it's late, I'm tired, I'm fresh off the back of yet another migraine, and I may well come to regret this, but earlier, Mikey from Hellstorm Wargaming was talking about the difference of opinion between Major Kill and Warhammer, which has been sorted out now. They have spoken, and while I gather they may not be on the best of terms or the best of friends, they have agreed to settle their differences and move on, which is good and admirable, and it shows two adults capable of communicating and sorting out differences, which, frankly, is something that everyone should be capable of once you reach a certain age. However, it does raise kind of an interesting idea about the nature of making videos, about the nature of making lore videos especially. In fact, just really anything surrounding an existing IP with existing storylines, with things written or drawn or invented by others that are then used by third parties. And I'm including myself in this, by the way. This is very much part of like something that I do that then is extrapolated on and talked about by, other people. So in the case of Warhammer 40k, both Major Kill and Warhammer are lore tubers, so they make videos about Warhammer 40k lore. It's quite a popular format. It's something that there are God knows how many channels that do it at this point. Of course, some are more successful than others. You've got Luton at the top of the pile with like 700 and something thousand subscribers. Warhammer not that far behind with 650, I believe. And then Major Kill with like 580, 590. I can't remember exactly, but you're getting into a good number of followers for these videos that are explaining something that someone else has written. In fact, something that Warhammer mentioned in a community post was that he is basically talking about something that other people wrote using artwork that someone else drew, which frankly is an incredibly self-aware way to look at it, and something that, again, when I say could kind of be applauded, I don't mean that in a sort of your place sort of way, because again, I'm including myself in this, where the vast majority of the content on this channel is talking about frankly, art that other people have made. And it's appreciation for that, it's criticising that, it's evaluating that, but it's still based off the creations of others. It's still talking about stuff that other people have done. I guess in a way it's just a time-honoured tradition of, you can go back however many centuries to look at critics of art, and it's just an extension of that, although you could argue that at this point it's become a lot more industrialised, and it's become a lot more of a kind of conveyor belt of content, as opposed to, the kind of classically written stuff that you might have seen in, days of yore or whatever, days gone by, ye olden days, however you want to phrase it. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people doing very similar things, where we sit down, we look at what someone else has made, we look at what someone else has written, someone else has drawn, someone else has sculpted, someone else has painted, and we either explain it, we extrapolate on it, we try and interpret it, or we simply just give our opinion on it. It's nothing new. It's also nothing necessarily original, most of the time. I think it's fair to say that there are quite a few different interpretations of different stories, of different artworks that could be classed as wholly original. Can you apply that to 40k lore? Can you apply it to 40k art? Can you apply it to models made for the game? I would argue yes, you definitely can, but something that was interesting about the kind of disagreement between Major Kill and Warhammer, and I realise I'm kind of making this seem like a very even thing, where it maybe not necessarily was. It's definitely more sort of one face towards the other, where Major Kill felt somewhat slighted by what Warhammer was doing content-wise. What it made me think about was, is there any such thing as an original lore video for 40k? And I don't just mean like trying to explain different aspects of the story. I also mean things like, what's the worst job in 40k? I'm 99.9% sure that someone will have already made that video. If Luton hasn't, Major Kill probably has. That being said, truth be told, I don't really watch either of them. So whilst that's an example off the top of my head that I don't necessarily know that either has actually made, I can make an educated guess that one of them probably has. if I now made that video without checking that they had, would that mean that I was stealing an idea? If you don't have an awareness of an idea, is that still stealing it? In my opinion, it's not, but then it's also not that simple. Something that is worth saying, I say early on, God knows how long I've been talking already, because this is going to be horrifically rambly, but whatever. Something that I've found when it comes to D&D, this is a slight tangent, whatever plot point you've come up with for a campaign, it is almost guaranteed that someone else has already done it. Almost guaranteed. At the moment, with the group that I play with, we have 5 players and 5 DMs, as in we all have our own thing. I have my own campaign, but I play in 4 others. All the other players have their own characters and their own campaigns. We are right now in a position where probably, if we wanted to stop the 2 campaigns that we were running, there would be 3 to take their place. So there's only 5 people at the table, but we all have individual settings, we all have multiple characters, we all have, individual plot points. Something that has happened repeatedly to all of us is that we will have a really cool, fun idea for a plot point. We'll have a great story on hand ready to go, and then someone doing an actual play on the internet, be it via Dimension 20, be it High Rollers, or Critical Role, or DesiQuest, or Worlds Beyond Number, like any number of those, we will get maybe a month out from hitting a significant plot point that we feel like is maybe not original, but at least not wholly ripped off from someone else, and suddenly discover that, oh wait, they're doing that right now, on Twitch, live, and you can watch it play out. Great. I thought I was doing something new and fun there. Might be fun, but it wasn't new. A particularly egregious example for me is that the entirety of my D&D campaign is predicated on the idea of a vast, unknowable, eldritch horror, because Lovecraft, that eats not just gods but entire worlds. Now, if that sounds vaguely familiar and you happen to watch Critical Role, you will know that that is the entire premise for Campaign 3 of Critical Role. Now, it's worth pointing out that I introduced that, I think, before Campaign 2 started, but it is a good illustration of the point, that there's no original ideas, right? You get what I'm going for. When it comes to something so established as 40k lore, where there are so many different things to look at, whether it's the history of the Dark Angels, whether it's whether Primarchs can come back from the dead, whether it's demon Primarchs being resurrected or brought back into the fold of the Emperor himself and being there to serve the Imperium once more, whether it's loyal Primarchs falling, whether it's like Leman Russ turning into a gigantic wolfen. Nothing new or original there, but all interesting things to talk about. Things like, the list just goes on. What would happen if this legion happened to turn traitor and the other one didn't? What would happen if this loyal chapter fell to chaos? Why did this particular group do what they did? There are 1,000,001 examples of things you can talk about within the constraints of currently established 40k lore. So is there anything unique and original about the interpretation of that lore? And if you do something that someone else has already done, is that directly copying someone? Is it taking inspiration from them? Is it a case of just clear-cut plagiarism where you see a video title and you go, you know what, I'm going to do that too? I don't think any of it is that simple in any way. I think it's incredibly easy to, just the example that I gave, like the worst, I've even forgotten what example I gave, the worst deaths or the worst jobs. I would put money on, if I went into YouTube right now and searched for either of those, I would get multiple returns for both. Like, it seems incredibly likely that I would. In fact, you know what? I'm going to do it right now. This is not what I'd originally planned to do, but we're going to do it. The worst deaths in Warhammer 40... Oh, well, it's already come up as an auto-return. Let's have a quick look. The 5 most brutal deaths in Warhammer 40k. The 5 most horrific fates in Warhammer 40k. Wow, Major Kill, you have absolutely annihilated this category. Jesus Christ. So in this specific instance, that's hilarious. The worst jobs in Warhammer 40,000. So we can clearly see that whilst there is something of a monopoly going on here, the two things, I think I gave both these examples. I'm so tired. Both of those have shown up. In fact, the worst fate in 40k, you could easily, bring that under the same category. Oh, hello, Bricky. Oh, lovely. So you get what I mean. Admittedly, maybe not as many examples from different channels as I thought there might be, because as I say, Magical's got that on lock. Nice one. That's not sarcastic. Seriously. You like the top 5 results. That's genuinely very well done. You get the idea. Like, if you see that and then end up storing it away and then making a video about it later without really thinking about where you got it from, is that necessarily complete copying or plagiarism, or is it just inspiration from the subject, like material itself? I guess it depends entirely on what the end product is, because at the end of the day, when it comes to Warhammer 40k lore, there's only so many things you can talk about. There are only so many things that have been written, and whilst there is a vast catalogue of it, frankly, I think it's fair to say that most people, I think, collectively kind of hone in on similar ideas. Like, for me, I want to know what the worst jobs in 40k are. And if I were to suddenly decide to make a video, I could tell you right now that until just now, I would have approached that thinking, I doubt anyone's really covered this before. But of course, the biggest lore channel on YouTube has already done it. Same thing with, like, the worst deaths. Yeah, it is relatively generic, but surely there's stuff in there that I could do that would be different. There's an acknowledgement there that someone else may have done it, but I could do something that they haven't done on a similar subject. And that's, I guess, what it comes down to when it comes to this discussion of originality, of, like, how you interpret things that other people have written and other people have drawn, and whether the covering of similar ideas, of similar subjects, of similar stories is copying, whether it's plagiarism, whether it's outright just ripping someone off and directly cloning their work. I guess it comes down to the end result. Because the fact is, you can do the same thing that everyone else does. When it comes to painting tutorials, I think probably the best example you can give when it comes to Warhammer content, when it comes to painting tutorials, if you look up how to paint Blood Angels, there are so many results. It is actually unreal. There is a lifetime's worth of knowledge and experience and ability being shown off, and you can take pretty much any one of those videos that shows up and you will be able to paint a Blood Angel afterwards. Does that mean that everyone who made those videos are just rip-off merchants, just copying the last person who did it? Not really, because each one is slightly different. Each one is a different interpretation. Each one has a individuality to it. Now, it could be entirely possible that you find 2 videos where the technique is exactly the same, but something you've got to remember with that is that they may have both learnt what they did off someone else. They're sharing what they know about this specific subject, but what they know has been influenced by another third party that you don't necessarily know of. Which also applies to lore, which also applies to the story of 40k, the background to it, the fluff. Anything that you choose to interpret from that could well be something that you have come up with by yourself. It could also align very, very easily with what someone else has come up with. Right down to the subject itself, like the subject of the video. The 15 most horrendous idiots. You know, the worst twats of Warhammer, whatever you want to call it. We want to know who the worst people are. We want to know what the worst way to die is, what the worst jobs are, what the most brutal chapters are, who the most treacherous Primarchs were, what the most likely situation is for this chapter or this legion to turn traitor or turn loyalist after however long. You might well find yourself copying what someone else has done in the form of, that's a good title. that's a good idea for a video. But the kind of truth of what that video is, or at least the honesty of what that video is entirely down to how much of you put in it compared to how much of like the inspiration that you put into it. If I see a video that is like, I don't know, 5 minutes long, talking about, say, the Wolfen, for instance, that's one thing. That's helpful, they're useful, great, I now know about the Wolfen. If I see a 35-minute long video about the 13th company for the Space Wolves that goes over far more than just the Wolfen, an entire timeline, the entire history of that company and where they went, how they survived, how they returned, the fact they returned twice, depending on which version of... You can tell we recorded the Adeptus Ridiculous 13th Black Crusade not that long ago. You get the idea. I think when it comes to Warhammer 40k, when it comes to the lore and the story and the videos about all of that, it's almost impossible to have a wholly original idea. And that's not me trying to throw shade at the people who, you know, have channels dedicated to that. There are plenty of people that I know and have huge amounts of respect for and thoroughly enjoy the content of, like Voldemort and Oculus Imperia and 40k theories, Tactical Imperialis as well. Like there are so many people who do incredibly good videos talking about what is ostensibly the same thing as everyone else. The important thing isn't, for me at least, uniqueness of idea. It's how it's presented and the way it's delivered and the way that it's interpreted. You could have two videos on exactly the same subject, and let's face it, if you want to know about Warhammer 40k lore, the chances are if you look up a video about a chapter, say the Ultramarines, you will be spoilt for choice on which video to watch, because all those videos are talking about the Ultramarines. They're all covering exactly the same subject. But it's not the fact that they're covering the same subject that's important. It's the fact that whichever one you watch, you will most likely get something different from. That's the bit that should make the difference. That's the bit that should be important. And that's the bit that kind of makes it so interesting and makes it kind of, I guess, raises the question of who does that lore belong to? Who do those videos belong to? Who gets to claim responsibility for, you know, who is the worst character in 40k? Is it Major Kill because he's done several videos on the subject? Is it Wes Hammer because he's got more subscribers? Is it Luton because he did his video 4 years ago and say Wes Hammer did his a year ago? Is it me because I'm pretty sure I did a video on that in like 2018? I mean, it's definitely not me because I won't have been the first person to come up with the idea. And even if I was, everyone else's answer may well be different to mine. And everyone's level of interpretation, everyone's like depth of research, everyone's approach to making that video will be or should be different. I just feel like there is more than enough space in the kind of 40k space where seeing duplicates is not necessarily indicative of a lack of creativity or indicative of outright copying or plagiarism. It's more indicative of what's popular at the time, what is being asked the most, and even if it has shown up before, even if it's not the first video on the subject, if it's different, if it has its own spin, its own interpretation, its own presentation, the fact is, we're all doing the same thing. We're all talking about stories that other people wrote, using artwork that other people drew, as Wes Hammer put it. There's got to be enough space for all of us to do that without it falling into accusations of copying, because really there's only so much that can be done with the material that everyone is working off. And again, I really want to stress that I'm including myself in this. So, yeah, I don't know. This is incredibly rambly. If this is still up tomorrow, then, I don't know, I guess it was better than I thought it was when I watch it in the morning, having had some painkillers and sleep. We'll see. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you for the next one.